Hello and welcome to the Heffy Doodle YouTube channel. My name is Lauren and I'm going to be sharing how I created this Happy New Year card inspired by the Royal Mist Sparkle Mix. I'm grabbing some of my supplies. I'm going to have stencils and dies. I do grab a sentiment stamp set, but I end up making this just a die cut only card, which is super fun. It's fun to use dies and maybe keep stamping for another day. So let's go ahead and get started on the background as this will require some dry time. I'm using a piece of Bristol Smooth cardstock because I'm going to be doing some stenciling with distress oxides, and I find that this paper works really well for ink blending. I'm using some of my Heffy tape to keep my paper secured to the back side of my stencil. This is the balloon room stencil, and I'm going to be using two different colors. So I am using Wilted Violet first, and normally I would start with the lightest color, but I am starting with the darkest color on this stencil. Once I have all of the balloons placed, cleaned my stencil off and then flipped it over, and now I'm using Wilted Violet. And when I overlap the two colors, you can see a third shade of purple is created, and I thought that it looked like my lighter purple balloons were more translucent. I have a little bit of gap there in the center, so I'm going to stencil on another wilted violet balloon and another milled lavender balloon. So once all of my stenciling is done using Distress Oxides, I will clean off my workstation and I'm going to grab my other stencil, which is the Starfall stencil, and I'm going to do a little bit of stenciling with stencil paste. So before I do that, I do want to cut out my rectangle. I've already done a lot of die cutting off camera to create my shaker. I'm using my stitched Imperial rectangles and I'm creating the background of my shaker. So I'm going to run that through because I don't like to have to worry about die cutting after stencil paste because it can create a big mess or ruin my stencil paste. So I went ahead and did my die cut first. So I'm going to do the exact same thing as last time. I'm going to secure my paper behind my stencil using my Heffy tape, and I'm going to grab some stencil paste. This is from Picket Fence Studios, and it is a kind of a light pink purple color. I thought it matched really well with the milled lavender, and I'm going to use my palette knife and just put on one layer of this beautiful sparkly stencil paste, and I will do a reveal here so you can see how pretty all of these colors look together. It's definitely a very Team Purple inspired card if you are a purple lover. So I'm just wiping off the excess paste off the edges of my cardstock here, and then I will set it off to the side so it can dry. I'm going to clean off my desk and especially go clean my stencil and move into die cutting. So I'm going to grab this grape soda colored cardstock. I thought it matched best with those two different distress oxides blended together on my balloon background. And I'm going to die cut some balloons using the more oval shaped balloon, very similar to the stencil. And I'm also going to die cut my sentiment, Happy New Year. And I'm using this colored cardstock as well as a rose gold cardstock that I have in my stash. I will have it linked down below in the description, but it is a kind of a metallic rose gold color, and I thought it looked as close as I could get in my stash to the gold sequins in my sparkle mix. So I'm going to start pairing up my letters. I die cut Happy New Year once out of the purple cardstock and once out of that rose gold cardstock so I could create a drop shadow between the two colors. So the purple cardstock will be the top, and then that rose gold will be the drop shadow underneath my purple letter. So as you can see here, I've added some glue burnt to the back of my purple cardstock H, and I'm using my tweezers to help me glue them together. And here you can see how I've just shifted that rose gold to the bottom right a bit so it shines, like I said, like a drop shadow underneath the purple cardstock letter. So now those are done. I have a bunch of balloons die cut as well. Let's jump back over to creating my shaker. So I'm going to place all of my die cuts in this little tray so I know where they are and I don't lose any pieces. My background is now dry, so I'm going to grab the rest of my die cut supplies. So I have my frame, which is die cut using the second and third largest of the stitched rectangle die set, and I'm adding some 1/8 of an inch double-sided adhesive behind the frame, all four sides, and I've peeled off the release paper so I can adhere a piece of acetate to the background. I also die cut the acetate with the second largest of the dies so that way it would fit perfectly behind my frame. Once I have that secured, I'm going to grab my Heffy Doodle foam adhesive. I have quite a few rolls in my stash and I'm going to use the smaller of the two rolls, which is a 5 millimeter wide dimension. I'm going to similarly add this foam adhesive just like I did my double-sided adhesive when layering on the acetate, but I'm using this foam tape instead and doing my very best to stay completely hidden behind the frame. Every time I add a new piece of foam adhesive, I make sure that it is butted up really closely and really snug against the previous piece of foam adhesive, so that way my sequins and gems from my sparkle mix will not escape my shaker. So once that panel is done, I'm actually going to grab my Misty to help me with lining up my frame to my background because again, they are die cut with the same size rectangle. So my Misty will just help me make sure I have it as straight as possible onto the background or onto the frame and foam adhesive. I'm opening up my sparkle mix and I'm going to pour quite a bit inside because it is a pretty big shaker panel. And of course, I get sequins on my foam adhesive, so I'm just trying to pick it off and place it inside of the shaker. It happens, it's no big deal. Once I have all of my sequins inside, I'll grab my background of my balloons and I'm going to make sure my frame with the sequins is in the bottom right hand corner of my Misty, and then I will place my background in that same corner to sandwich my shaker closed. Now it was a teensy tiny bit off-centered. Again, not a problem. I'm just going to grab some scissors and trim off any of the cardstock from my background that is exposed outside of the frame, which is just a tiny little bit. It probably wasn't even noticeable, but because I could see it, I just wanted to trim it down. And that is my little shaker panel. I love the colors, the purple and the gold. I think it looks so pretty together and it will pop off really nicely off of this black striped piece of pattern paper. This is die cut with the largest A2 size of the stitched Imperial rectangles and the paper is from Fright. I centered my shaker panel to the center of that pattern paper and now I can adhere it to a card base. This is a top folding A2 card base out of some white or solar white ultra thick Nina cardstock. I'm using my glue burr again, this time to glue the pattern paper with the shaker panel onto my card base. The wet glue just gives me a little wiggle time to make sure that I have it lined up on all four edges. So now that my shaker card is pretty much done, let's start gluing on our balloons and our sentiment. So I'm going to lay everything out. I end up going with 2 balloons in the top left hand corner and 2 balloons in the bottom right hand corner. I have another purple one on there, but I end up not gluing it onto my card. So in order to adhere these balloons down, I'm just using more double-sided adhesive. This is a 1/4 of an inch wide this time, and I'm adding it to the back side of my balloons and layering them down in the lower right-hand corner. I'm doing the gold one first and then overlapping the purple balloon. And in the top left-hand corner, I will reverse that. So that way it kind of looks a little different, but yet still the same when it comes to the two different corners of balloons. Once all 4 balloons are adhered, I'm going to work on my sentiment. So as you can see here, I've already lined up year and used some of my Heffy tape to keep them all in place. And I'm going to repeat that process with the words happy and new. So that way I can adhere down each word and my letters will already be pretty evenly spaced and in place so I can easily add the glue and then add the letters to my card. So let me get all 3 words done, and then I'm going to actually start with the word new since it's in the middle of my sentiment. I'm going to have happy on one line, new on the next line, and year on the bottom. So I'm just taking a look and making sure I'm happy with how I'm going to space everything out, and I am not going to glue that other purple balloon down. So like I said, I'm starting with new and I'm adding Gloobert behind each letter, and then using my Heffy tape, I will center that. Also using my grid mat, I like to make sure that my sentiment is as centered as possible. So I am using the grid mat for some help here so I can kind of follow the lines of where the new needs to go. And then I will glue down year underneath new and happy on top of new, and I will have the sentiment Happy New Year. Now I am using wet glue on acetate, so I just put a clear block on top of my card for a little bit while I put away some of my supplies. And here is a final look at how this fun purple and gold shaker New Year card turned out. I hope you enjoyed this process and you have a little fun yourself using just dies on a card. You can find all the supplies that I used down below in the description. Thank you so much for watching this video today on Heffy Doodle's channel. Make sure you also check out our other social media for even more inspiration. Bye!